Hi class, welcome back to Biomedical Ethics, Philosophy 365. Today we're going to be going more in depth into what bioethics is, and I'm going to begin introducing you to ethical reasoning. In particular, we'll be looking at three branches of ethics that tend to engage with various questions that arise in medicine. All right, so class today will be structured as follows, or the lecture today will be structured as follows. First, I will expand our introduction of what bioethics is. We defined our terms on Monday. Now we'll be looking at determining the breadth of the field. Then we'll be looking at how it fits into the field of ethics, and we'll be discussing various rules of ethical decision making that can be followed in a wide range of contexts when making normative decisions. I will also be showing you a brief video, hopefully a video within a video, right? It's meta, on the trolley problem, and prompting you to discuss this question if you so, or this problem if you so desire, in the weekly discussion forum. So this is one topic that you could focus on. So just to recap, what is bioethics? On Monday, we spent a lot of time defining that term and separating out the two parts, the bio and the ethics. Well, bioethics, in a nutshell, is the study of ethical issues that emerges from advances in both the biological sciences. Hence, as we'll discuss, research ethics falls firmly within bioethics, but also within medicine itself, and the clinical setting falls under the purview of bioethics. Now, this includes a broad swath of topics, ranging from debates over the following, and these are some of the most contentious issues that we as a society, some of the most contentious issues that we as a society are grappling with today. So bioethicists tarry with issues of life and death, such as those concerning reproductive rights, abortion, and euthanasia, the allocation of healthcare resources. When we have limited healthcare resources, how best should those be allocated? How best should those be given out to various different populations? Should we prioritize the most vulnerable? Should we prioritize medical professionals? Who should be prioritized in these situations? The young or the elderly, right? The right to refuse medical care. Today, in medical contexts, respect for autonomy or respecting a patient's choices is given utmost importance. But what happens when respecting a patient's autonomy could be harmful for that patient? How do we weigh our duties to the patient with or against our duties to do no harm? And the application of biotechnologies, which are continually developing, right? So, how do we apply these biotechnologies? How do we deal with new advances in cloning, gene therapy, etc.? What is good application? What are problematic applications? What are applications that we might want to limit or ban utilizing policy? Right? Or should there just be a pure, like an open playing field? So bioethics in action, the reason why I had you look over that piece, even though it included a wide range of case studies and a few embedded videos, which I think were very important, is because it highlighted how bioethics subject matter encompasses or includes these controversial and weighty matters, right? And their list includes aid in dying, assisted suicide, cloning, abortion, artificial reproduction, genetic engineering, etc. So we have a lot of topics that we're going to be touching on throughout the semester. And indeed, each of these areas, issues of life and death, the allocation of healthcare resources, the right to refuse medical care, the application of biotechnology, we'll be talking about each of these in depth as we move into bioethics proper, move deeper into the field. In addition, it should be noted that bioethics is an interdisciplinary field, meaning that there are a wide range of different people from different perspectives and with uh, different training that are professional bioethicists, including academic philosophers, physicians, sociologists, and nurses, social workers, clergy, lawyers, research scientists, doctors. The list goes on and on. So, in addition to bioethics, having this large swath of topics under its umbrella, it also draws from a wide range or several different fields as well. And that's important to note as we move forward. So, we looked at the definition of bioethics, what bioethics is, and we looked at some of the topics that fall under the category of bioethics. And it should be noted, however, as we move forward, that bioethics as a term and as a field is very much contested at this particular moment. And why is that? Well, there's disagreement over what the precise limits of bioethics should be. The biological, the medical, etc. These categories could expand or contract depending on what context we're looking at. So there's one camp that says, well, the field of bioethics should concern itself only with questions involving biology and medicine. We should focus on clinical ethics. We should focus on research ethics and questions that directly arise out of the biological sciences. And that is where bioethics should end, right? That should set the limits of bioethics. But there's another group that argues that the field should focus on a wide swath of questions beyond the medical contexts. So rather than just focusing on clinical and research settings, as human health can be impacted by where we live, by our transportation systems, by environmental factors such as potential contamination, etc., smog, and whatnot. All of these environmental factors could be considered medical factors. Ergo, bioethics should include the environmental components of health. In addition, there's an argument that this could be expanded to food as well, as food is directly connected to health. So there's one camp that's saying we need to limit bioethics to largely the clinical setting and research setting, and there's another camp that wants to question that, broaden our scope, include social justice concerns as well. So how should we demarcate bioethics? Well, due to this raging debate, there are now 4 subfields in bioethics, and we'll be touching on each of these throughout the semester. We'll be spending a lot of time on the first, which is clinical ethics. So how do we make better ethical decisions in the clinical setting? We'll also be talking about research ethics. How best should we go about performing research in a way that's ethical and equitable to all of those involved? We have global bioethics, which has recently come to the forefront with COVID-19 and the pandemic. How do we work together as an international community to address medical concerns and medical crises? And then we have food/environmental bioethics. And this is the broadest category that falls under the bioethics umbrella. And this is looking at the environmental and nutritional impacts to health. So in a nutshell, you can define each of the 4 sub-branches as follows. Clinical ethics is the ethical analysis of the practice of clinical medicine, medical research, etc. So what goes on in the clinic? Research ethics looks at the research process, identifies ethical challenges and questions that arise in this context in both human and animal research. And we'll be specifically looking at guidelines that are put in place policy-wise at R1, Research 1 institutions, nationally and internationally throughout the semester. And in fact, bioethics as a field largely emerged out of concerns that research was being done in an unethical manner, at least historically speaking. And we'll talk about that history moving forward. And we have global bioethics, and this is the analysis of ethical issues at the global or international level. So as clinical trials move into international waters, what ethical standards should be in place? Should ethical standards be in place? Should we utilize the ethical standards where the clinical trial is being conducted, or should companies be beholden to the ethical standards of their particular home country, right? Which standards should be in place and which should be honored? There's also issues concerning surrogacy and international surrogacy, and the rise and development of non-governmental organizations and their push to provide adequate health care, not only in specific country contexts, but around the world, such as with Doctors Without Borders, for example. And we also have work on what an international response would look like to pandemics. And that falls under global bioethics as well. And then we have, as I said, the broader category of food and environmental bioethics. And we'll be spending maybe about a week or two at the end of the semester on this particular topic. But this is the analysis of contextual issues that impact both personal and community health. So food and environmental ethics very much draws from justice frameworks. And when we move into principlism and we talk about autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, and justice, and these words might sound like Greek at this particular moment, but on Friday we'll be unpacking those and we'll be utilizing those throughout the semester. But that justice component of a bioethics approach encapsulates how, or forces us to look at how benefits and harms are distributed across populations. And environmental bioethics very much wants to look at that and argues that these larger societal distributions should fall within bioethics proper. So I'm just setting the lay of the land as we move forward to sort of set the foundation for our discussions. And this will hopefully give you an idea of how these four disparate subfields sort of come together under the umbrella of bioethics proper. Now, one of bioethics' strengths, as I've been sort of intimating throughout these two lectures, is that it doesn't push for a single ethical theory, or for the Lord of the Rings fans out there, one theory to rule them all. Its strength is focus. One of its strengths is that it focuses on providing tools for shared decision making. So it recognizes that there are going to be, or could be, several people involved in making medical and research decisions. And these wide range of people come from various backgrounds. They have different ethical landscapes, so to speak, different ethical training, different values and commitments, and these all inform their decisions. So one of the ways to move forward in shared decision making is to identify the various values and commitments that they have and help speak to those values to come to consensus. And bioethics recognizes that holding a single theory is not going to do the work that we need it to do in the medical context. So who are these stakeholders? Well, at the very least, we have the practitioner, or in many cases, the practitioners, So these are the various medical professionals that are involved in providing care. We also have the patient as well, and the patient's family, although it should be recognized that HIPAA tends to limit their involvement. And then in the case of healthcare policy, and in the case of determining what is acceptable or not acceptable procedures, such as a physician-assisted suicide, etc., we have the public, and we have the policy aspect of bioethics that sort of demarcate or set the limits of what can or cannot be performed in a medical context. Right? Now, as I said, each of these stakeholders could have unique value profiles. And recognizing these values or ethical positions is important, and I can't stress this enough, for effectively addressing concerns and for alleviating conflict. Because at the end of the day, when you're making medical decisions, these are time sensitive often, right? You have to make a decision within a particular time period. And so it is important to alleviate conflict and to come to consensus as quickly as possible, but not to do so sloppily, right? To produce quality decisions in the limited time that you have for making those decisions, right? So balancing each of these decision-making groups and recognizing each of these values is key. But how do we do this, right? That seems, okay, that's a very general broad swath, or a swath, identify the values, speak to those, come to consensus. That seems great in abstract, but as anyone, or as many of you have probably experienced, I have 6 brothers, and coming to consensus with my 6 younger brothers can be quite a challenge, even on little things like where should we take mom for her birthday, right? Like, it's like, Jared wants, to take her to Olive Garden, whereas Eric's like, Ruth's Chris. And I'm like, well, she likes when we cook for her, so let's do a home-cooked meal. And then, it just goes down from there. And that's something small. Or, well, not for my mother. But it's not in the realm of medical decision-making, right? So how do we do this? Well, the first component of bioethics, hence the ethics in bio, right, includes 3 different types of ethical theories. And these are important because several stakeholders will come to the table holding values that are aligned with one of these 3 basic positions. So being able to recognize these quickly is an important first step for speaking to, say, a stakeholder's values. So Western philosophy has over a 2,000-year history, identifying and motivating values and crafting ethics that are utilized to guide individual and social decision-making. Most moral theories focus on determining what actions are right versus what actions are wrong, or they focus on character. Why is so-and-so a good or admirable person? Well, this person is not so good or admirable, and leaves something to be desired. And virtue ethics, out of the 3 basic types here, is largely focused on character, whereas deontology, which literally comes from the root duty-based ethics, and consequentialist ethics, these are focused on determining whether or not an action itself is good or bad, or right or wrong, right? And these could provide us with general rules of thumb, and they often do, and they've been incorporated over the last 2,000 years into our general decision-making tools. All right, so let's unpack these. Deontological ethics, and we'll be looking at specific ones throughout the semester, are duty-based ethics. And many people feel that humans have clear obligations to other humans and to animals, such as not to commit murder, not to, say, for my brother, not to steal my bike, etc., not to take the last piece of cake, especially if you were not the one who baked it, right? There are certain commitments or certain ideas around what duties we have to others, not to say, um, uh, not to say, well, to follow traffic rules, right? That would be another duty. Not to run someone over, like very basic things, right? So there are two types of duty-based ethics. These either recognize absolute duties or conditional duties. And you can think of conditional duties as more contractual duties. So absolute duties are those that are pushed to be universally binding on all people, such as not harming your neighbor, treating people with respect, not stealing, right? Trying to avoid lying, etc. And these are basic duties that many people feel should be universally held, regardless of context. You shouldn't harm another person, regardless of what the context is, for those who hold duty-based ethics. You should avoid lying. You shouldn't steal people's cookies, right? Whereas conditional duties largely focus on contractual duties. They're the result of contracts or agreements between people. Or animals, in the case of Turtle. So this is my dog, Turtle, and if I promise, see, it's an if-then statement. If I promise Turtle that I will take her out on a walk, then I have a conditional duty to take her on a walk. Right? So people who hold a deontological view that focuses on conditional duties recognize or argue that contracts and promises should be respected. And we have an ethical duty to stick to our word, so to speak. If I promise my dog to take her for a walk, then I need to do so. Poor Tortuga, right? So when a stakeholder evokes this is my duty, or it's your duty not to lie to me, or it's your duty to follow the traffic laws, right? If they're evoking this duty-based language, then they are signaling that their decisions are being guided by very strong moral convictions that they hold. Now, commonly accepted duties that you might find, that stakeholders might hold, include fidelity, loyalty. There is this idea that you should be loyal to family and friends, right? Family and or friends, or keeping promises. There are typically strong moral convictions concerning lying, right? Or conditionals. If you promise to do something, then you should do it. A person is judged by the quality of their word, right? Like that is a person who holds that is very much holding a deontological position. To respect others, or in the case of medical ethics, right there in the medical code, right? To do no harm. You shall not do harm to others. And beneficence, to benefit others, etc. So deontological ethics, it's an abstract name. It seems like it's a very theoretical position. But when we start looking at the beliefs and values that people hold, this type of ethic plays an important role in decision making, especially in the medical context. All right, so we have deontological ethics. Now, another type of ethical theory that plays a key role in guiding people's decision making and in medical context is consequentialist ethics. Now, it's very common for people to determine their moral responsibility by weighing the consequences of their actions, right? So if I'm driving down the road and say, goodness to Betsy, a dog runs out in front of my car, just to keep with the dog theme, and I accidentally hit the dog, that is a consequence. right? So for a consequentialist, then that would be a morally problematic situation because I brought about a negative consequence, which was harming the dog, right? So for consequentialist ethics, what you want to do is weigh the benefits and the harms of any action. And the action that brings about the greatest benefits and the least amount of harms is the action that you want to take. Now, there are three types of consequentialist ethics, depending on the scope of what you think is of moral considerability. There's ethical egoism, which is one of the oldest ethics, born out of the Greek tradition, where it's all about you. When you weigh the consequences of an action, you weigh the benefits and harms to yourself, right? And you do that action, which brings about the greatest benefits and the least harms to you. An ethical egoist would argue that that is the ethical action to do. And we'll be discussing this later on as an ethical theory, and I'm curious to see if you think this should hold or not, or if you think we should have a larger societal ethic, right? But for an ethical egoist, the number one person in an ethics situation is the individual. Then there's ethical altruism. And an ethical altruist will argue, well, you know what? Don't worry about me. Really, it's about everyone else. I should not be included in the ethical calculus. And my mother comes to mind in this particular situation, or, a grandmother, one could argue, where they're always doing everything for their grandkids, and they might be sacrificing their own happiness or benefits that could come to them for the benefits of their grandchildren. That would be an example of an ethical altruist. So when you weigh the benefits and harms, the right action is that which brings about the greatest benefits and the least harms to other people. And then there's utilitarianism. And utilitarianism plays a major role in determining healthcare policy, at least in the context of the United States and in certain European countries, et cetera, as well. Now, the utilitarian argues that everyone should be included in the calculus in determining what the best action is, right? Yourself, others, and in the case of Peter Singer, non-human animals should be included as well, right? So then you would weigh the benefits and harms, and the right action would be the one that brings about the greatest benefits and the least harms to everyone. Okay, so we've looked at what bioethics is. We've sort of kicked the tires and we've discussed what the limits of bioethics should be, although we'll be coming back to that question at the end of class during our final week, because I'm curious, after we explore these 4 sub-branches, I want to see if you agree with the first camp, that bioethics should largely fall within the medical and research context, or if you agree with the second camp that argues that bioethics needs to be expanded as a discipline. And I'm honestly on the fence, so I'm interested to see where you guys lie, so to speak. And we've also looked at 3 general categories of ethics, and this sort of sets the stage for the specific ethical tools and theories that we'll be discussing throughout the first couple of weeks of class before we move into clinical ethics within, I believe, the 3rd week. Now that we have sort of this base set, or this foundation set, I just want to briefly take the last couple of minutes to introduce you to a rough and ready 5-step model for ethical decision making. And you can utilize this in your discussion posts, etc., or in any context. So the first step in making ethical decisions is determining whether or not there is a problem, right? So if you have a sense or a feeling that something is wrong, then it's important to stop and analyze whether something is wrong. So there's an argument that emotion is sort of the forerunner of rational decision making, because your emotions oftentimes tell you whether or not a situation is acceptable or whether or not there's a problematic component of a situation. So I urge you not to discount those intuitions and those emotional experiences. If you feel like something is wrong, if you feel like there's a problem, or the patient isn't being treated properly, or you're not sure you're comfortable with said decision, just the 5-step ethical decision making prompts you, this model prompts you to take a moment to deliberate and to analyze the situation. Right? So that moves us into the second step. If you feel that something is wrong, take a moment to analyze and assess. Oftentimes there will not be a problem, and you'll be like, oh, well, okay, like, oh, false alarm there, But if there is a problem, identify the ethical problem and perform a moral diagnosis. So what is the ethical problem? Who is involved? What is the scope? 4, seek a resolution. Now, this could include individuals, and it could include you making an individual decision, but as the medical and research context is largely built on community decision making, oftentimes this includes what the ethical decision making model lists as 5, which is working with others to determine a course of action. Now, these might seem very simple, but it's good to have them in the back of your mind. So if you sense that something is not right, gather information and assess, identify and or diagnose what the potential problem could be, and seek a resolution with others. Okay. So I am going to be posting the trolley problem case because it highlights some of the tensions that we'll discuss between deontological or duty-based ethics and consequentialist ethics. So I'm just going to show you this video. I wonder if I can do a video within a video. And then I'm going to prompt you with a few questions. And if you want to tarry with those questions, if you want to discuss those questions in the discussion forum, that would be wonderful. We can also discuss the trolley problem more in depth on Friday as well, although we'll be moving into principalism or that approach on Friday too. So let's see if this works. Dun, dun, dun.
Let's picture an out-of-control trolley. In this case, we'll use a train hurtling towards 4 men who are stuck on the track. Steve is on board the train and notices that the conductor is incapacitated. He doesn't know how to hit the brakes, but he does notice a lever that would switch the train to another upcoming track. If he pulls a lever, the train would switch tracks, thereby saving the 4 people on the track ahead. But here's the rub. On that alternate track, there's one guy who's similarly stuck and would face certain doom if Steve decides to spare the 4 others. The question then is, what should Steve do, morally speaking?
Okay, so that is the trolley problem in a nutshell. So do you allow the train to go barreling down and harm the 4 people who are stuck on the track? Or do you switch the lever, or pull the lever, and then have the train switch tracks so that it will hit 1 person, but you'll be saving 4? So I prompt you to answer this question. What do you think is the best decision? Utilizing the deontological ethic and utilizing a consequentialist position. And out of those, which do you think that you should do? Right? Would you pull the lever, or would you let the train barrel down? Right? What do you think is the ethical position here? And I'll be curious to see what you guys think, and draw from the class material that we discussed today. Well, let's see. Yeah. Okay. So I'll leave you with the 5-step model. Today we covered a lot of ground. We set the foundation for our future discussions in bioethics. We talked about the subfields of bioethics. We discussed 3 branches of ethical decision making. So thank you guys very much. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and I will see you on Friday. Take care.